Tony Leonardi and the Youngstown State University Jazz Ensemble.
My next interview is with Bob Matchett. Bob is a trombonist and also the director of bands at Seneca Valley Senior High School in Pennsylvania. Throughout his career, Bob has performed with various symphonies and chamber orchestras throughout Ohio and Pennsylvania. He has also performed with groups and artists such as the Glenn Miller Orchestra, The Temptations, Ray Charles, Rosemary Clooney, and many others. Here is my interview with Bob.
Excited.
Yeah, these are really fun. I mean, they've been a lot of fun to do. And then, going back and watching them, I've had a lot of laughs.
I was going to say, I mean, I think when it's all said and done, after all the interviews, we'll have to at the reunion concert, we'll have to do some sort of who does the best Tony impression, kind of who does the best impression, we got to do some of that,
Yes, that's a great idea. We should do that. We should do a montage of the greatest clips,
right, from
everyone's interview.
You can't talk about your dad in the stories. It's impossible. We all do it, every one of us, and not go into his voice.
Right.
You can't. It's because he was such a presence and such a big figure, larger than life. It is what it is. It's meant out of love and respect entirely, but
Right, I know. Oh, that's so funny.
Yep.
So what have you been up to lately? What have you been performing at all, or have you done anything on Zoom?
Yeah, a little bit of stuff. I mean, my career as a trombonist over the past decades, really, I've become a show player. The stuff that comes through Pittsburgh that uses a trombone, I play a lot of those at the Benedum and the Benedum Theater and the Byam Theater. But to be honest, Paula, as soon as the pandemic hit and the Broadway season and our summer seasons got canceled, I definitely hit a low point in my motivation in the summer because there just wasn't really anything to look forward to. There wasn't anything, it lost purpose. And then sometime in the fall here, I regained my motivation. It's wait a minute, I'm going to use this time to actually better myself. And so last night I played at a jazz club in Pittsburgh, and people were like, "Well, you've been working over COVID. You've been working on your face." I'm like, "Yeah, I haven't got a haircut, but I've been working on working on trying to like play the trombone better. So yeah. And then then I have a full-time teaching job. So it's a busy life.
That's wonderful. Where are you teaching?
I'm teaching at my alma mater, which is Seneca Valley High School, which is like 30 miles north of Pittsburgh, 25 miles north of Pittsburgh. And yeah, I've been here now 23 years here. So yeah, it's not been a short stint, you know.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Paula.
Yeah, you're welcome. So you're not far. I mean, you're
Actually, there was for a little while, I was actually for a couple semesters, I actually taught at the university adjunct just a little bit. Like they asked me to do like a class called Jazz Education for the Non-Jazz Musician. So there were like a bunch of music ed majors that would take my class and we talk about teaching jazz. And then I did a class I think called Jazz Improvisation for the non-jazz educator, and did that. And that class was small, and it was. Those classes are hard. Those classes are difficult because they're not jazz musicians. And like a 1 night a week class or 2 night a week class, you're trying to teach them the basics of improvisation. And it's like, oh, I'm like, kids, it's way more than that. Trying to cram this into a trimester or a semester or what it is. I mean, you're gonna get a very thin coating of what this really is.
Oh gosh, I can't even imagine. I remember I used to ask my dad, what is improvisation? I didn't understand it. I still don't fully get how you do it. I know what it is now, but I don't get how you do it. And he was like, I can't even explain it to you. He couldn't. Yeah, so one of these days I have some of his books and I want to look through them and try to have a better understanding myself, but I can't imagine trying to teach non-musicians with that.
This just popped in my head right now. Did you play clarinet for a minute?
I played sax and did not take it seriously at all. Poor Debbie Ray, Mike Camiff's wife.
Oh yeah, Mike's wife.
She gave me lessons and I did not practice. I just wanted to be good. So I didn't want to do what it took to get there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have 2 daughters right now that are doing exactly the same thing. I've got them lessons with good teachers and they don't work at it at all. My older daughter plays oboe and piano, and I just keep saying to their teachers, I'm like, I try to help them. They're like, I know. I'm like, well, I'm their dad. They're not going to listen to me. And they're like, I tell them to listen to you. I'm like, you're going to have better luck getting them to do anything to me. And my other daughter kind of plays the French horn, but I can't tell you the last time she got it out of the case. Now, she's probably taking the horn out of the case maybe 5 times during the whole past year during the pandemic.
Yeah.
She's not into it. She's way more into theater and singing and stuff like that. So.
Oh, well, that's cool. That's cool.
Sure.
How old are they?
13 and 11.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
Those are good ages. Are they close?
No, they're not good ages. No, the 13-year-old is all kind of teenager, and the 11-year-old is influenced by the 13-year-old all kind of teenager. I mean, oh, they are defiant. They are. Oh, I love them to death. But I'm in my office right now to do this interview because this is where I practice now. I come back. It's like I'm back in music school over the past year. When I need to practice at night, I drive up to my school, which isn't far. It's like, a 10-minute drive, but I come in to get away from all the house stuff so that I can just, I can be me.
Right.
Don't have to worry about them like making the dog mad, making my wife mad, making me mad, making a mess.
That's a good idea. That's good. You have some place to go. A lot of people don't.
Yeah. The custodians up here, I think I'm a little bit nuts. I think they think I'm a workaholic. Like, man, that guy, he works a lot. I'm like, well, this is selfish right now. This is me just practicing trombone for me. This has nothing to do with the actual gig.
Right. If you want to give me a little bit of background on how you got into jazz and how you started playing trombone, what age were you? And then how did you find out about the jazz program at YSU and my father?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a musical family. My dad was a trombone player that actually had been out with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra when he was out of college. So my dad was and he still is. My dad's still alive. So I don't mean to use past tense in a bad way, but my dad is a very accomplished trombone player. And so for me, being interested in the trombone, it was not a choice. You know, like in fifth grade, he just handed me the trombone. He's like, "This is what you play now." And he had started me very early on Suzuki violin and some piano lessons. So I honestly, I was playing violin at age 3 and doing ear training and stuff like that. So my dad very much was my first huge musical mentor. And he handed me the trombone in fifth grade. And there's a funny story though. He handed me the trombone. He's like, "You don't need to join the band though yet." He's like, I'll teach you everything you need to know. He said, like, the band, like, they're going to be learning whole notes and half notes, and you already know all that. So, like, you stay in the classroom and keep your academics up. And then, like, maybe in sixth grade or whatever, you can join the band. So I go and I audition for the sixth grade band director. Wonderful lady, incredible teacher. You know, but she rightfully so was going to make me go through the paces of everybody else that was going to join the band. So she's like, "Okay, play this note." And it was like a middle note. And I played it. And she goes, "Now play a lower note." Well, I knew a lot of lower notes. So I played like a really low pedal tone as like this fifth grader. And thinking I had this smug look on my face. And I look at her, I'm like, she's like, "Not that low." Like, she was actually kind of mad that like I just like showed off. I was like, so she put me on my place there. And she's a friend. I mean, she's amazing. She's an amazing teacher, but I'll never forget that. But anyways, so yeah, I started playing the trombone because my dad kind of made me. And like a lot of kids and a lot of junior high kids, it's kind of like, you know, you're kind of like wishy-washy about it. You like it because your friends are in it, you know, but I was, I'm happy to say this, I was forced to practice every day as a kid. Like practicing was not an option. Like 30 minutes every day, like in like elementary school, and then in middle school, it was bumped up. It had to be 45 minutes every day. And then, you know, came like, you know, the festival audition circuit things in high school. And like when I did that first audition, I did really well against like seniors and juniors. And then it like clicked for me. It's like, oh, I guess I could kind of do this, you know, and then it didn't become a chore. Then it became like the total enjoyment factor where you're like, okay, yeah, I get to do this. And I always loved jazz. I mean, I grew up listening to a lot of like the old a lot of like dance band kind of stuff. There was a lot of Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey and Artie Shaw and Benny Goodman being played in the house on the record player. But, you know, I think probably the life changer for me, and this is the connection then ultimately with your dad, was when I heard Woody Herman's band for the first time. So when I heard Woody's band for the first time, your dad wasn't on the band. This is much later than that. It truly was life changing for me. They came to a local university, which will remain nameless. And I think I was maybe in 9th or 10th grade, and the band came out and it was just roaring. And I was on this euphoria. I came home and I literally listened to that CD. I'm not exaggerating, probably 1,000 times in the first 6 months I had it. I could sing every solo. I could whistle every note. I knew it inside and out. And that was kind of my gateway drug into jazz was the Woody Herman band. And from that, then everything else goes from that. So like when I found out your dad had been the bass player with Woody Herman, I was like, for me, that was like pie in the sky. That was like the dream, you know, because that was the first big band that I totally fell in love with, for sure.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea.
Yeah, so the album that I fell in love with initially was called Woody's 50th Anniversary Tour. And it was one of the first gigs that actually Woody didn't conduct because he had taken sick. He was still alive when they did that tour, but he was sick. So Frank Tiberi led the band. But that band had like John Fedchuk and Paul McKee and Mark Lusk on it in the trombone section, and Jim Rupp from Columbus on drums, and Mike Brignola, who's leading the band now, on Barry, and Roger Ingram on lead trumpet. And I mean, so many other guys. I'll stop there. Like that. Even to this day, like I think I still own 3 copies of that actual compact disc, because it's still one of just my favorite albums. It's one of those go-to albums. Like when I need to feel young again, you know, I put that on. I'm like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm back in 10th grade.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, and did my father know how much you love Woody Herman?
He definitely did, because, yeah, for sure. When I think when I was a senior, he's like, Bob, he goes, I want you to play a ballad with the band. I want to feature you. You know, he's like, but you pick whatever tune you want to do. I'm like, oh, I'd love to do John Fedchuk's arrangement of What's New. I go from the Woody's 50th anniversary tour, and your dad was like, okay. And he comes back to me, I don't know, sometime later. He's like, Bob, it's not in print. He goes, but here's John Fetchock's phone number. He goes, if you call John, I bet he'll sell you the chart. You can get the chart probably from John, or I don't know how that went down or something else. But I do remember, like, picking up the rotary phone, taking like 45 seconds to dial John Fetchock. And John answers the phone. And I'm like, hi, John. I said, my name's Bob Matchett. And before I could even say anything, he goes, John's like, how'd you get my number? I had to drop your dad's name, and then he was very cool then all of a sudden, and he sent me the chart, and I got to do that, play that What's New chart from that with your dad. He had played, and your dad had played a couple other of those charts of John's from that album as well. So your dad absolutely knew my total infatuation with the Woody Herman Big Band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
Yeah, Woody's band was the one for me, for sure. And so then, like, so honestly, so then, like, maybe to transition here a little bit, like, how I found out about your dad was there was a student from Seneca Valley. Actually, there were two that went to Youngstown State just as music majors. And this is pre-cell phone. We're talking now probably like 1987 or 88, around there. So there were no cell phones. They went to Youngstown State. And I remember the trombone player that went to Youngstown, his name was Steve Spitaller. He was in, I think, Jazz Ensemble 2 at the time. And he wrote my dad, who was my band director, my influence, a letter, and just said, Mr. Matchett, I know that you don't know anything about this college, Youngstown State, but it's only an hour away from Seneca Valley. And I'm telling you, the jazz bands up here, you would love. I'd love it if you'd come up to a concert. So we took my dad's former student, Steve, up on the offer, and we went up to the Duke Ellington tribute concert that your dad had put on. And it was myself and the guy who ended up being my college roommate, Alan Mascari. We went up with my dad, and that's all it took. We heard Jazz Ensemble 1 do the tribute to Duke Ellington, and like the whole way home, I just remember the three of us, my dad, Alan, and me, just like talking nonstop about, like, what did we just witness? Because we had no idea. Like there was like this Berlin Wall between Pennsylvania and Ohio at that time. Like, as far as like people from Pennsylvania didn't go to Youngstown State, not a lot. I mean, there's some definite exceptions, but we had no idea. And from that moment on, it was like, okay, this school is very much on my radar. And then my dad had Tony come down and work with our jazz band. I don't know, a few months later, maybe it was the following year. And that's when I got to officially like really meet your dad and work with your dad the first time. And I remember like standing up and playing a ballad as a high school student and thinking I'm all that and like a hot shot. And like your dad was very complimentary, but even right from the first time, he was like, he was going to tell me some things to do differently, which was great. He was like, oh, you sound great. You're like, I was curious as why you're not using slide vibrato. And I was like, okay, I guess I should start doing that. I remember going home, man, and like trying to figure out how to wiggle the slide so that I didn't sound drunk. But that was, and my dad used slide vibrato all the time, and I hadn't yet. But it took Tony, who I just had met that first time, to say that. It was like, okay, I guess I need to do this, and then, and then the rest is history. You go to Youngstown State, and for me, I mean, I had great professors throughout the whole School of Music for sure. But I went to Youngstown State because of Tony Leonardi and the jazz band. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I participated in everything, but it was your dad is the reason that I went. For sure.
That's so awesome to hear.
Yeah. Yep.
So do you have any funny stories or Tonyisms?
Well, I have two that just, so your dad was such a tough love father figure to all of us in the program, and on a previous interview, I'd heard Sherry Luchetti, she was one of my mentors. She was in her final year when I was a freshman, and she was a great friend to me. She was such a compassionate, loving person towards me. We were really, really dear friends that first year that I was in school. And I heard her say in her interview with you, I lost my train of thought about Tony being a father figure, and heard her tell some of her stories, and it got me thinking about some of my own stories, and like Tony being like this tough love father figure. So the one I remember very vividly was a bunch of us in the music school were throwing a toga party. And so Friday during school, we said, all right, everyone's going to wear their togas to school. All right. Now, I was definitely too chicken to wear togas the way you're supposed to wear a toga. I definitely had like gym shorts on underneath, for sure. But I remember it was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon and big band rehearsed at 3 o'clock. And I'm walking down the hall and Tony sees me wearing this toga and he was having none of it. He goes, he said something, he goes, I hope you're going to not be wearing that when you come to rehearsal at 3 o'clock. So I of course, I followed suit. I had to skip my 2 o'clock class, whatever that was, drive to my apartment in Struthers to put on normal clothes so that I could come back and not tick your dad off because he didn't want any distractions in rehearsal. And you know what? Now that I'm a teacher, I get it. In the moment, I didn't get it at all. In the moment, I'm like, come on, I'm just wearing a bed sheet over me. I'm still going to play the trombone fine, but I didn't. Right. Now I get it wholeheartedly. Because you want people in the rehearsal focused. The task at hand is to do this, and that wasn't happening. So I went home and changed. I did. I showed up to rehearsal. He never said a boo about it. Not a thank you or anything like that. Nor should he have. But I fell in line real quick. And then there's another story that involves you, Paula, that I love. Okay, I love this story. You knew I was going to tell this, didn't you?
Yeah.
So when Mike Kamoff graduated, he had an overnight jazz show that he had taken over from many people, Keith Turner and John Vineski and some just awesome people through the program called Jazz Explorations. It was a Saturday night jazz show from midnight till 5 a.m., I think, or something like that on WYSU. And so when Mike left, he offered the show to me and I graciously accepted and took it. And, it's late at night, it's tired, and, people would call in and make requests sometimes. Well, there was this 12-year-old girl or this 13-year-old girl that would call in occasionally named Paula and request Sarah Vaughan or request, and here it is. It's sweet little Paula Leonardi calling in several times asking for requests. Well, your dad caught wind of that at some points. And so like I'm walking down the hall and he's like, Bob, I need to see you in my office. And I'm like, oh, what'd I do? I'm thinking, did I miss a sectional? Calls me and shuts the door. He's like, Bob, the next time Paula calls the radio show and requests a jazz tune, he's like, tell her she needs to go to bed. And here's you're just trying to like call these jazz tunes to impress your dad. And he's like, he was so like, again, he was so like cut and dry about it. Tell her to go to bed. I'm like, I'm thinking, wow, this is great. He was having none of you staying up that late to listen to whomever, Ella Fitzgerald or whoever.
Well, what's funny is I have a whole collection of your shows. Like I dated them, Jazz Explorations, Volume 1, 2, 3. I mean, I recorded them.
Do you still have those?
Yes, I do.
We have to do a swap because I am the worst at archiving. I have nothing ever. I would just be curious just to hear some excerpts. That'd be hysterical.
Oh yeah. I'll have to get them out and figure out how to digitize them and send you the files or whatever. But yeah, for sure. I want you to have copies of those. But so I had this whole collection going, and I don't know if you had said it on this show or if I had heard it somewhere, but I remember specifically there was a rumor that Dizzy Gillespie wrote A Night in Tunisia on a garbage can or something.
Yeah, I've heard that rumor before too, right?
I called you to ask you if that was true or something because I wanted to impress my dad with my knowledge. But what I would do is I would stuff towels in between where the door, you
so that the sound wouldn't get out.
Yeah. So when I would stay with him, I'd stuff the towels underneath there and I'd hear him walk by the door and I'd hear him go, I know you're still up. I'm gonna go to bed. He still knew.
But you know what, Paul, is amazing? It's like here, other kids your age at that point in time are staying up late to do bad things. You're staying up late and you're worried about like getting caught listening to jazz, the devil's music, Oh.
And I'm Tony's daughter. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That's the funny part is like, I thought he'd be so impressed, but no.
He was going to be a father first, and
Yeah.
and the jazzer towards you second for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that was funny. But I used to enjoy, calling and saying hi to you and, talking for a minute.
I think the funniest story, other than that, with that jazz show though, was Mike had started a thing where like from 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, he called it like the showcase hour, or like both sides of the pie or something like that. You play a whole album. So like from 2 to 3 a.m., you didn't have to program. You just knew, I'm going to play this whole album. All right, so what it would be. And I would sometimes, I would take my alarm clock in with me, and I might take a little nap during that hour. And I remember one time, like the phone ringing in the studio, and I don't know who it was. And I pick up like WYSU or Jazz Explorations. They're like, the CD's been skipping for 15 minutes. Because I was out. I was zonked out. Don't know who it was. I was definitely caught with a pillow. They had like my head down on the board, and out there over the wattage of WYSU. 15 minutes of just like, some people were probably like, wow, Roy Hargrove's really playing that lick. He's really playing that lick over and over and over again.
Oh my God. That is so funny. Oh my gosh.
I'm glad your dad never found out about that, because he really was all about like really actively listening to jazz rather than passively listening. So like, I mean, and that's such a huge thing dealing with jazz. So it's like, if you didn't actively listen to jazz, like, and like study it, like sit there and immerse yourself in the sound of it and really take in what was going on, he wasn't going to be into that, And so like, he used to tell stories about like guys like Ralph Lawman and Glenn Wilson and Harold Danko. He's like, we would have to be doing a run-out concert with the big bands, and we would be late. We couldn't leave on time because Ralph would be sitting there and he's like, nope, kids, we can't leave until John Coltrane finishes his song. We got to listen to the whole song and be late, And so like, if you didn't actively listen, even if you were like in a live music venue, he was going to call you out on it. And then I'm sure another interviewer will have told this story, but I bore witness to it when he was playing at Mr. P's, I think, with Chip Stevens. I think that might have been a band, and whomever else, maybe Val Kent on drums or something like this. And a bunch of us went to Piatt Street I said Mr. P's, it was a Piatt Street. And we went to check it out. And a few of the guys in the band, while the band was playing, decided they were going to play on the indoor bocce ball court. Well, that was going on. All right. God only protected me from not doing that myself. All right. For whatever reason, because I like to have a good time. And for whatever reason, I was not part of that quartet at that moment. So, didn't think anything of it. Well, the next day in school, in jazz improv class, your dad walks in and everything seems fine, So there's like maybe 9 of us in the jazz improv class, 10 or whatever. He comes down to the front of the band room and he asks like these 3 or 4 people. He's like, "Can you stand up? Can you stand up? Can you stand up?" And they get up and they think they're ready to play Yardbird Suite or Scrabble from the Apple, whatever we were doing. So they're all getting ready like this. And then your dad asks one of the most famous questions in my time there. He said, in his demeanor changes immediately. He said, "Fellas, what does bocce ball have to do with jazz?" Except, he said it with like this tone of like, "We're going to go." And the whole room falls silent. And, there's a pregnant pause of 15 seconds. And, he pounds his fist. He's like, "I asked you guys a question. What does bocce ball have to do with jazz? I want to know why at Piatt Street last night, you guys weren't listening to music. You thought rolling these balls around the floor was more important than listening to what was going on the stage. Aren't you jazz musicians?" And he just goes off. And honestly, he's making 20, 21-year-old boys just start crying. They're crying. He gets done. He goes, "Get out of here and compose yourself." And like the rest of us are sitting there. It's like, "Oh, please don't have us stand up and play now because I won't sound good," But he made his point. he was all about active listening. And if you weren't going to actively listen like them, and notice I didn't use any of the guilty parties' names right now. They know who they are. I am concealing their identities for their own safety.
Good idea.
They might have some PTSD from that one. But oh man. But at the same time, so your dad had that side of him. We all know that. But the greatest thing ever, though, and the most uplifting stuff, though, was like if you were in a rehearsal and things weren't going well, and he's just mad as a hornet, and he's yelling and yelling and yelling. Sometimes he'd get done and be like, "Oh, and you can't play time. You sound like you're building a house back there on the drums. And I'm embarrassed to be your bass teacher. And hey, nice solo." Like if he might like point to the person just soloing. Like in the middle of that, he'd be like, "Oh wait, but there was one good thing." And like if you got that pointed out as like something that was good, you were like sitting up tall and you were feeling great about everything. It was so neat, you know.
Yeah.
I think my favorite line of your dad's of all time was, again, I won't say it was not directed towards me, but again, I was right there. He's like, he got mad at the lead trombone player, and he says, we got guys in the Middle East flying $500 million planes, and you can't play a $200 trombone? I don't know where that connection came from, but maybe it was about $50 million jets. We got guys flying $50 million, and you can't play a $200 trombone. Oh, you know, I wish. Paula, are you aware of the Buddy Rich bus tapes? So there's these.
Oh yeah.
Right. I wish that some of us had collected some of these things. They wouldn't be as floridly profane as like Buddy Rich's were, but I wish some of us would have collected some of those things just so we could look back on it and just know that, yeah, all of those things though came out of a place of love and came out of a place of like demanding excellence from all of us. It wasn't ego driven. It was 100% music driven all the time. And, you know, when I got hired in my current position here at Seneca Valley, you know, I really, you know, made the jazz band be like a little high school version of what I dealt with at YSU, where it was coming from the rhythm section out. You know, it always had to groove. Like if there was no good groove going on, oh man, it's going to be hard to swing. And I'm really proud of what we've accomplished here in my tenure here with that. And you know, in the Pittsburgh music scene right now, like people will say like, oh yeah, we know that guy went to Youngstown because they play with really good time. You know, and that's your dad's influence, because it was like, if it wasn't in the pocket, it was trash, you know, and that's one of the greatest lessons he taught me. And I apply it to everything, whether I'm playing classical music or whether I'm playing a wedding reception with pop music or you know, or jazz. It's like, it's got to be in the pocket of time.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, your dad was, he was the greatest in getting us to swing. I mean, man, I was one of the fortunate ones that I played in Jazz Ensemble 1 right as a freshman, you know, and so like I auditioned into it right away. And remember the first rehearsal, we go in, and I think I'm remembering this right. I think the first tune we were going to sight read, which for me was really sight reading, was Groove Merchant by Thad Jones. And it's got this really great sax solo in the middle of it. And I'm an 18-year-old kid right out of high school, and we start playing this, and it's Mike Camiff behind me on trumpet, and Tim Leahy behind me, and Dave Perico behind me, and Marty McMaster's behind me, and Brian Cook. And then, you know, in the saxophone section was Russ Peterson and Dave Coaches and Dan Heasley, and Greg Parnell was playing drums, and Sherry was on bass, and many others, you know. And we start playing Groove Merchant, and I'm like, whoa, this is sight reading? I was like, I'm incompetent. I can't do this. Because the saxophone start playing the solo, and I'm going like, how is this humanly possible? Well, it turns out you find out it's like some of these guys had played this tune many times in clubs and sat in and stuff like this. But I thought they were sight reading, and I honestly thought that like they were like some sort of like extraterrestrial beings that had come to Earth, and that they were able to do this having never heard the tune before. Because I didn't know who Thad Jones was. And like, I'm like, I just remember like literally walking out of there and like having to go back to my dorm room and like definitely change my shorts. I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to work really hard. you know. But what ended up being so cool about it is like all those guys, you know, that I just mentioned, they ended up becoming my big brothers, you know, and it was such a family atmosphere. So like, you know, you felt super honored when like Mike Kamoff is like, hey, let's walk over and get lunch together. Because to me, like Mike Kamoff, you know, was a god, you know, and he is. But like he was like, but as a freshman, it's like, oh my gosh, you know, and then you start playing gigs with these people, and just it just perpetuated itself into just so many great moments.
Oh, yes. Yes. That around that time that you're mentioning was when I started going to the clubs, you know, with my dad. Obviously, I wasn't old enough to just walk in myself, but I would go there at 11, 12 years old, every weekend, every gig. And you guys were just, I mean, unbelievable.
Well, it's we were definitely honing our craft. I mean, we were definitely honing it, and like, you know, I don't want to say that we're the last generation that got to really truly hone it in a little bit of an old school way, where there were jam sessions a lot. I mean, think about a city of Youngstown with a population of like, what was it back there in the 90s? Like maybe 90,000 people, 100,000 people. It's not a huge city, but you know, you had jam sessions at Cedars, you had things happen at Mr. P's, you had things happen up at the Penguin Pub, you had things happen at Pyatt Street Down Under, you had sometimes some things happen out at the Moonraker. We had the Beat Coffee House came on campus there. We would do the Jazz Society jam sessions in the whatever it was called in the Student Union Center. I mean, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of these things. It's like there was a place to go and hone your craft in the evening almost every night in a city that size, and those just don't exist that way anymore.
No.
They're not there. I mean, like the sessions aren't there in Youngstown, and so like, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's still some things happening, but we were really lucky to have that big city music scene in a city the size of Youngstown. So like when you went and played in Cleveland, or you went and played in Pittsburgh or in Columbus, like the spotlight wasn't too big for you because you had been honing it in our city, and truly it was a national scene, you know, in Youngstown. So like we got to hear so many amazing people come through our little town that just, oh my gosh, we're so fortunate. You know?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, Bob Mitzer, Marv Stam, James Moody, Eddie Daniels, Duffy Jackson. I'm forgetting so many of them. Who else? I'm trying to think of the guest stars. Jigs Wiggum. It was just great. They would come in with the band, and then, you know, usually pick up another gig outside somewhere, either at Mr. P's or something like that. It was
Right.
It was nirvana. It really was. You know, people sometimes say it's like, if you could go back, if you could, would you go back and do it again? And sometimes you hear some people say no. For me, the answer is 100% yes. But the old man answer then is like, yeah, I'd go back and do it again, knowing what I know now.
Yeah.
So maybe not the information I have, but knowing how I could go back and change a few things, because we'd always tweak some things we did, you know, but like really being able to sift through, okay, what's the most important stuff going on, and be able to like make your time even more efficient, and then therefore you'd be able to grow even faster.
Right.
Yeah. But that, honestly, I'm telling you that the jazz music scene in Youngstown was 99% because of Tony Leonardi.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad that, you know, I mean, of course I'm still devastated that he's no longer here, but I'm glad that he doesn't know how it's changed, you know, because it's changed so drastically. But you know, we can hold on to those memories for sure, and that's why I want to do this legacy concert as a tribute to him, because I think getting everybody together again, how amazing would that be?
Well, and to be honest, Paula, you're the perfect person to do it.
Oh, thanks.
Honestly, you're the perfect person to spearhead it, because I mean, the bloodline is the bloodline, and like all of us see your dad in you, you know, and just know that he's there. And it's like, honestly, you know, whether we knew you well or not, you know, just knowing that you're Tony's daughter, we we embrace you wholeheartedly because of that right away. You know, you mentioned your dad's passing, and one of the biggest sorrows of my entire life truly is your dad passed while I was on my honeymoon. So all of it happened. Your dad's passing and his services and burial and everything all happened when I was in Cancun. And
Oh,
I didn't get to attend any of that stuff. And it was, I mean, you know, what are you gonna do? You're gone, you
I
know.
know.
And like I think I talked to you recently, just like, you know, I really I need to go to your dad's gravesite. I do. I need to go there and just honestly, it'll sound silly, but I just want to kind of go and just take my trombone and play for him. I do.
You should. Oh my gosh.
Go to the gravesite and be like, hey Tony, you know, I mean, this is for you and because of you both. Yeah.
You absolutely should.
Yeah, I will. Maybe not here in when it's cold like this, but you know, maybe not when it's like 16 degrees outside like it is right now. But yeah.
Oh, come on. It'll sound good.
Yeah, that might be your dad's way of like, yeah, you should do that for a couple of things you made me go through. So, you know, there were definitely some gray hairs on your dad's head from me, I'm sure.
Oh.
But
you know, I remember now, I'm thinking about it. We used to tune into you too. I remember several occasions where I'd be sleeping over his house and I'd want to put your show on and we'd listen to it together.
Maybe it was your dad calling and saying, it's been skipping for 15 minutes. I was in a daze. Oh my goodness.
That is the funniest story.
If Gary Sexton, who was the program director, the assistant program director at the time, if he hears this, Gary, I'm apologizing to you here 30 years later. Oops.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's great.
Oh man. So what are some of your fondest memories of the jazz program as, like I said, like as a, you know, as a young girl, as a teenager? What are some of the things that stand out most to you when you think back? It's like, oh, I remember that concert, that moment in that concert, or that particular guest artist, or something that your dad said about something, or something that's really stood out to you.
Wow. There's so much that I remember. I think the biggest thing that stands out is just the energy. I've talked about this in some of the other interviews I've done, but just the energy of the audience.
Right.
That is something I've never experienced since. And I go to concerts, you know, and that was truly, you could never explain it to someone who wasn't there. Like I try to tell my friends or my husband what that felt like, and you cannot convey it. You had to be there.
The word that I've always used is it was total synergy. There was an absolute collective energy between every person that was there. So the audience was so connected to the band, and the band was so connected to each other, that we would always feed off the audience's responses, and it just perpetuated itself. Those, you know, I mean, we do like 4 on-campus concerts a year. Those were, I mean, go-to events. Like people in the community were going out to dinner beforehand. They were coming in and they knew your name. And it was like, you know, you felt like a rock star. You did. That night, you felt like you were up there on stage as a rock star. And then to hear your dad as the audience is clapping at the end of a tune, you know, and literally your dad having to shout into the microphone to be heard over the audience, you know, hear your name. It's like, Bob Matchett, trombone. Like, just it's like, it made you feel so great. And it's like, wow. And like you thought it was going to be like that the rest of your life, you know, and really quickly you start to realize it's like, it's not like this everywhere, you know. So when I graduated from Youngstown, I went out with the Glenn Miller Orchestra, and the audiences were big and they were fun, but the music, and there's nothing wrong with the Glenn Miller Orchestra music. It's wonderful, you know. And my time on the road with the band was really educational and really a great time, but the audience didn't have that kind of energy, you know, because the music didn't didn't, I don't know, it didn't demand it. It didn't, what's the word I'm looking for? The music didn't really, I don't know, it didn't put off that vibe where the audience would be hooting and hollering like the way jazz music does, and, so then it's like, oh, okay. And then, moving to Pittsburgh to start to teach, I started playing right away in a Monday night band, similar to a Vanguard band here in Pittsburgh. It's called the Balcony Big Band. I still play in it now. Actually, I played with them last night. And I started playing with that band right away. And it was close. It was close, but it was, as far as like the energy with the audience, but it wasn't as big of a venue. So, you're playing at this smaller jazz club with a big band, and there might be like, 100 people in the room, and they're into it. But, when we're playing there in the Chestnut Room in Kilcawley, and they're standing room only, and they're out in the lobbies, and, you can't get through the audience, to get to the stage as you're changing out bands. It's like, excuse me, I need to be up there because I'm playing now.
Right.
I have never come across that exact thing again in my whole life. And I've had the privilege of playing some really great bands, but not with that collective synergy, that word I'm using again.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when they would do the standing ovations,
They would
just
go on.
over and over and over, they wanted more and more. And sometimes you guys would just keep playing, and it was just like nobody wanted it to end. And it was such a letdown when it was over. It took me like a week to recover.
And it was so great afterwards then, because we'd all matriculate over to the Golden Dawn. We'd go up to the Golden Dawn. Your dad would come in, and the professors from the School of Music could come in. And it didn't matter if you were 18 years old or 25 and in school, you could still go into the Golden Dawn. So like some people were in there having their schooner of beer and a slice of pizza. Others were in there just to continue the vibe from that night, even though the music wasn't happening.
Right.
And that would go on until 1 a.m. And then you'd make your class on Tuesday because you had to. But it was again, it goes back to it was such a family atmosphere at all times. And sometimes your dad was the tough love dad. He was, and we all needed that as kids.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I remember a fond memory I have with him is he gave me a project one day, and it was to put all of the programs from every single concert in order for him. And I have those somewhere upstairs. But I remember doing that. And of course, I wasn't doing it right. He was always watching over me, telling me, whatever. You don't have the right semesters in order there.
Got to look at the date, Paula. Look at the date.
Yeah.
Oh, they're such amazing times. Oh.
Yes. But like you said, I mean, even as a kid, going to that, I never thought it would end. I thought for the rest of my life I'd be going to these clubs and everyone would be around and this energy would always be around. And when we lost him, I mean, what a huge void. I mean,
You're honestly totally irreplaceable. Your dad's irreplaceable. It is. I've heard this quote before, and it's so apropos, right? So applicable right now. I wish you knew. Don't you wish you knew you were living in the good times while you were living in the good times? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
And we can look back on that. It's like, yeah, we were living in the good times.
Oh, yes.
We were living in the good times for that specific, art form, that community. It's like, that was the golden years of jazz in Youngstown. It'd be great for someday for it to come back, and hopefully, the reunion concert here can be a lighter fluid to get something, going again. Maybe some people will connect, and the business owner will be like, yeah, we need more of this, and it can start again. But who knows?
That would be great. That would be so great. No, were you there when Chuck Mangione came to town?
Yep. Okay. That was awesome. Chuck, we did the benefit concert, and Chuck brought the whole band. And we did that at Powers Auditorium, I think.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah, there's some great stories about that too. And yeah, so that was cool. And Chuck was really good. And Jerry, what was the saxophone player? Jerry Nyhouse, or I forget. He was a great player. And the rhythm section guys were younger at the time, but were really cool. And I didn't, to be honest, I didn't know those Chuck Mangione tunes before that. It wasn't like he wasn't a particular artist that I had ever really checked out, but I'm like, oh, that's a cool song. That's a cool song. And he was so gracious, and like I think he donated his time that day. Those times, I think he came for almost for free or like very reduced cost, so that we could sell the tickets at a higher price. He was still a big enough name that we raised that scholarship money, which was great.
Yeah.
That was really fun to do. Man, I remember like when Marv Stam and Bob Mintzer came in, they came in together, and Tony had said, he's like, hey, if you want to interview him on your show, he's like, I'm sure they'll do it. Like I remember Tony said, I remember driving down and picking them up at what was the hotel right beside the music school, the Wick Pollock Inn?
Yes, yes.
I remember picking up Marv and Bob at the Wick Pollock Inn and driving them over to the studios on a Saturday morning to like interview them, to then play the interview later in the show, and doing it with some other guys too. I did it with Duffy, definitely Duffy Jackson, and maybe Jigs Wiggum or Eddie Daniels. There were definitely a few of those, but like that was really cool. Again, thinking back, I wish I knew more what to ask them at the point in time. Like when you're 19 or 20 years old, you don't know what questions to ask these
Right.
jazz icons. Now here's a funny Marvin Stam story. And actually, there's another Youngstown connection in this. So Lou Pisani and I, and maybe even Tim Harker, were playing a wedding out at the Westmoreland Country Club in the middle of like the country outside of Pittsburgh. This is probably 15 years ago now. And the bride says, hey, my uncle's a pretty good trumpet player. Like, would it be cool if he sat in on some tunes tonight? And like the band leader's kind of like, somebody else. Well, then like as the guests are coming in, we see this guy carrying a trumpet case, and I elbow Lou. I was like, dude, that's Marv Stam. It's Marvin Stam. It's Marv Stam. Like, that's Marv Stam. And he's like, no. And I'm telling you, that's Marvin Stam. And sure enough, it was Marv Stam. He came up and sat in on a couple tunes at the wedding reception. It's like, you can sit in, So, the band leaders are not always cool with people sitting in. And this is a great story that needs to be told too. So probably in the jazz legacy of Youngstown right now, probably the most, the biggest name is probably Sean Jones, right?
Yeah.
So I was there the moment when your dad met Sean. So we took the band to Packard Music Hall, and I'm going to guess this was like 94, something like that. I think Sean was maybe a sophomore. I might be misremembering some small details of this, but I remember Rich Rollo, because Warren Harding was hosting the jazz festival. And I remember Rich Rollo coming up to your dad and saying like, hey, I've got this really young hotshot trumpet player. You should let him sit in with the band. You're going to want him to sit in with the band, Tony. And Tony really wasn't into that. So like you go and play a high school, you showed off the band, but you didn't have the high school kids come and sit in. But Rich was somewhat insistent, and Tony reluctantly was like, okay, well, can he play rhythm changes? I remember that. And I remember Rich like, he'll play anything, man. Just let him come up and sit in. And so your dad let Sean come up and sit in on, I don't remember the tune. It was something like maybe like Little Pixie by Thad Jones, which is like A flat rhythm changes. And he says to Sean, you got one chorus. And Sean I'm saying Sean was in 10th grade. Maybe he was in 9th grade. Maybe he was in 11th grade, but he was like, he starts to play and you see your dad like go from being like, I can't believe this high school kid's going to sit in, like going from being kind of like perturbed to like lighting up like a Christmas tree. And like, he goes, open it up. He's going to keep going. He's going to keep going. Like right there on the spot, let Sean like do his thing as a high school kid. And the tune gets done and Tony's beaming ear to ear because, he's like, he was a great recruiter. When he heard a high school kid that was that was great, or that he knew had potential, he got his claws in him and they were not leaving the state of Youngstown. I'm telling you that. And I saw him do that with Sean that night. So Sean tries to walk off the stage. He was like, no, sit on the next one too. He let him stay up there with the band for several tunes. If if my memory serves me right, it's really close to that. But I remember that being like, yep, that's when I learned who Sean Jones was, and then, you know, shortly thereafter, you know, he came to Youngstown, and the rest is history. You know, now he's literally the president of our jazz association in the country. You know,
Wow.
like,
Wow.
seeing that moment where, like, you know, Tony recognized, oh my goodness, how have I not known about this kid yet? You know, it was awesome. It was cool.
That I'm so glad you told me that story, because I came across an article. I've been going through boxes and boxes of my dad's belongings, and it's been that hard to go through. It's taken me 20 years.
Right.
But it's hard, it's emotional. But I was going through some stuff the other day, and I came across this article. Someone interviewed my dad, and Sean was still a high school student, and he said, someday this kid's going to be a giant superstar. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I haven't told anybody about that yet, but I'm hoping to interview Sean, you know, do one of these with him. And I want to tell him about that, you know.
Yeah, and like I said, there could be some small details about that story that I'm misremembering, or that might not be quite right, but my story is definitely close. For
That
sure, because I was in the band then. I just remember like Sean playing your dad lighting up, going like, "Whoa," you know.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's a real testament right there of, you know, my dad knew when he saw talent. He no question.
He absolutely did. And your dad was one of those guys that, like, he could feel you out real quickly as to whether or not you had the mettle to get through his curriculum. You know, his curriculum wasn't just, you know, it wasn't just the bookwork. It wasn't just the music. It was the lifestyle, the professionalism, this is what you got to do. You know, I remember your dad one time saying, like, you know, there's being sick, and then there's, I have to call off a gig sick. He said, like, if you have to call off a gig, you better be on your way to the hospital, you know, and like, you better be really sick. Like, if you have a cold, you show up, because that's your job. Like, it's not, you know, it's not the sniffles. And like, that was part of the transition of kids going from high school to college, where it's like, in high school, you know, you could probably convince mom and dad to let you stay home if you had a cold. But like with your dad, he's like, no, that's not the way the real world works. You know, like, if you have a cold, you still go do that. That feels funny to say that right now during COVID. You know,
Right.
right now, those are like, it's like, you couldn't say that kind of thing. You know, again, 30 years ago, I mean, nobody thought anything of that, right?
Right. But that's so true. That's so true. And I mean, he even instilled that in me as well, you know, the hard work ethic, you know, keep your commitments.
Right. Right. And, you know, I mean, and certainly some of us, me included, you know, like, we had to learn it the hard way. We're like, you know, you'd burn some bridges when you're younger with some musicians in town, and then have to like rebuild them, you know, and not burning bridges with your dad. I mean, but the people that, like I said, and I'm proud to say that I was one of those people that got through his lifestyle curriculum, his jazz curriculum, this all encompassing thing. And I'm so much the better for it in every aspect of my life, you know, for sure. You know, it translates so much more than just jazz, you know.
Right. Right. Gosh, well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared. This has been a blast.
Honestly, it's fun. Like, listening to some of the previous interviews, like, it's a trip down memory lane. Like, you know, people say, like, oh, I remember that. And it's like, you know, it's, like I said, I'd go back and do it again in a heartbeat, as long as your dad was going to be there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you, Paula.
Thank you so much, Bob. Oh my gosh, I appreciate this so much. And
All right, awesome, Paula.
okay, well, you take care. And yeah, when I get a hold of those jazz exploration cassettes and get some time to download them, I'll get them over to you.
obviously no hurry because I didn't know they existed, but like that's pretty awesome. Like, whoa, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Hey, it's going to be great catching up here in 2022. That's going to be a fun. It's going to be, it's like, Tony Palooza.
Yes, I love it. That's a great name.
Tony Palooza. Well, that's the original composition that one of those guys, either Lalama or Dave or Mike came up. They got to write a tune called Tony Palooza for the event.
Yes.
That's what they got to do.
Yes.
All
I'll
right.
spread the word.
Awesome, Paula. Hey,
Okay.
take care, hon. Thanks so much.
You too. Thank you so much.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.